I'd like to introduce our next speakers. They're Helen, Chilton and Sarah Beazley. Helen is a teacher of the deaf, who's one of our lecturers in deaf education, and she was originally trained in Leeds. And Sarah's a speech-language therapist who has a very long-standing interest in the development of language skills in children who are deaf. And Sarah and Helen are going to tell us today about some very interesting research that they've carried out on development of theory of mind in children who are deaf. And theory of mind is the idea of being able to understand that other people have states of mind who might differ from your own state of mind. And if you think about it, that's pretty important in being able to communicate successfully with other people. And they've just been awarded a very prestigious Investing in Success award by the University of Manchester that's supported their research, and they're going to share with us some of their findings this morning. Thanks.
Okay, I think the first thing that I probably need to say is that we've had a slight change of title. As we started to think about this project and what we wanted to tell you today, we realised we couldn't just report on the project that we've just done because we did a prior project, so we thought maybe we need to kind of include both. So we've slightly changed the title. Otherwise you might have wondered what we were coming to talk to you about. Okay, so these are things we're hopefully going to cover today. This idea of what is theory of mind, why does it pose challenges for deaf children and those around them? Why is it important in light of new technology? And we're going to talk about this study 1, which is now complete, and study 2, which is the Investing in Success opportunity that we've had. And then we're hopefully going to have to think about what next, you know, new directions that we're taking. We really like this quote. People don't act on the basis of the way things really are, but on the basis of their beliefs. So if we think about when you go to a meeting or anywhere that you go in life really, you hold with you values already. You hold thoughts with you already. It might be thoughts about something that's happened in another meeting. And the decisions that you make there aren't based on the things that are actually put to you on the table. They're based on the things that you already know, or you think, or you feel, or you believe. And as adults, we know that other people are also doing this all the time. So when I'm sat across the table from Wendy, I already know that she might come with a completely different perspective or mindset. And I'm prepared for that, and we can deal with that, and we can juggle with it, and we can juggle with it. And that's okay, because we've got that as adults. What we're interested in is understanding how we get deaf children to have that, because it's an important part of life for everybody. So we've got this idea about unpleasant truths, comforting lies. As adults, we're making decisions all the time about what we feel we need to tell people and what we feel they need to hear, and they might be two very different things. For deaf children, this might be quite difficult, and so we'll go on to explain this. As very young children, we start to learn from a young age when we need to tell little fibs or big whoppers or white lies and all these kinds of things. And that's important. It's a part of our social understanding, our social awareness, and we need to encourage and ensure that deaf children also replicate that. So I think I'm going to hand you on to Sarah now for a few slides to talk about the theory.
Okay, so Helen's given you a brief taste there of what we're starting to think about here. There are a range of definitions. The ability, some people doubt whether there really is a theory of mind and whether it's a set of different psychological processes brought to bear in order to enable you to do this. So sometimes we'll put it in italics or in inverted commas, because there isn't necessarily a theory, but there's a range of issues that lead you to a position where you're able to think about perspectives other people are taking, the perspective you're taking. So this mental states issue, it includes concepts such as thinking, knowing and feeling, as opposed to the perhaps more observable things that we can see, the facts, descriptions and physical needs. So they're more abstract notions there. Although there's very interesting research to show how early children start to develop this as a skill. A lot of interest in terms of practitioners on theory of mind began with children with on the autistic spectrum. So a classic false belief task was developed in order to see if you could test when this started to emerge. So if you look at we've got two dolls there. We've got Sally and Anne. So we've got Sally and Anne and a basket. And Sally puts her ball in the basket with Anne watching, and then Sally goes away to do some unknown thing. Meanwhile, Anne moves the ball into her box. And when Sally comes back, you need to know where she's going to look for the ball. Now, up to a certain point, children are more likely to say in the box, because they know that's true. They've seen Anne put the ball in the box, so they know that's the truth. Whereas it varies a little bit, but around 3, at this sort of test, children start to realise that she'll look where she thought it was left, so she'll look in the basket. It's quite language dependent, this assessment, and I think they've done research recently with children as young as 18 months to see its beginning to emerge. We're looking at eye tracking. They've got nice computerised assessments with a cat going down a tunnel after a mouse, and then the mouse is moved to a different place, and the very small children of 18 months, their eyes will go down where they think the cat will expect it to be, not where the mouse actually is. So we've got a feeling that this emerges rather sooner than perhaps these sorts of assessments can show us. So in relationship to deaf children, theory of mind has the potential to be restricted or delayed in some deaf children, not because at 18 months or younger they don't have equal capacity as any hearing child to develop theory of mind, but it may be the access to language and communication that influences it. You'll see there are many references there to working with, looking at how deaf children develop theory of mind, and some of them are quite contrary too, because there are lots of factors involved. So we try to pull those together to say these are some of the common groupings that seem to influence how successful children are, deaf children are at developing theory of mind. The number of siblings, the common language in the home, the language level being used, and a particular one of interest is the maternal use of mental state language. Are mothers actually talking to children about their feelings? So there's some nice research with twins, one of whom is deaf and one of whom is hearing. And the nature of language used with the hearing child is very different than the nature of language, particularly around mental states. So they're more likely to talk about feelings and their own perceptions with the hearing child than the deaf child. Interestingly, sign language isn't, there are contrary indications about whether sign language does or doesn't help, but more significantly, deaf children from deaf families seem to acquire theory of mind at just the same level as hearing children from hearing families. So there seems to be some commonality of language that may be more important than the actual specific language. We wanted to put this in because there is some contrary advice here too about whether cochlear implants allow children to develop theory of mind more efficiently. I think the latest on it really is to say, well, there are varying results, but the 2013 reference there say that it's to do with how early or late the cochlear implants the child might be implanted. And of course we're following those cohorts, aren't we, of more those who've been earlier implanted, and we're still watching to see what happens. So there may be some argument that for some children with early implantation they can get good and appropriate theory of mind development, but it still depends on siblings and the language in the home, the confidence that the family have around them. So there are more factors. This is clearly encouraging, but there's not a simplistic link here, as you might imagine. So as you see that quote we put at the bottom there, post-implantation intervention services should still encourage mental state language used by parents and service providers. So this emphasis on ensuring that the right input is given. Okay, so coming back to the study Helen and I did some time ago, we were lucky enough to work together in a college of further education where there were 100 deaf students from across the northwest. It had a bilingual and bicultural approach, so a very positive, constructive way for young deaf people to come together to learn in that sort of context. And just think about where I've got. Yeah, it's on the next slide, yes. So yeah, we've managed to get this published this last year to think about whether the particular stuff we did from this project had any wider implications for working with deaf people and beyond. So let me explain a little bit more. So we're in a College of Further Education. We've got this very good collaboration between speech language therapists and teachers for deaf and the mainstream tutors. We've begun, Helen and I were running several groups, and I was running groups with other teachers for participants of sign, participants who use speech, and there were lots of positive initiatives, but somehow we were still recognising that quite a few of the young deaf people were struggling in social contexts, and we wanted to get our heads around what sort of issues they were facing that we perhaps weren't addressing with the groups that we were already running. So we found that there were some common additional difficulties around communication. Some of them weren't experiencing successful communication, even if they had communication support workers, and there were interpreters, there were discrete groups just taught by deaf tutors, so the access to language wasn't always the issue. But there were misunderstandings arising and conflict often arising between the deaf students and either the hearing students or sometimes between the tutors. So things that would happen like, I was thinking of one student knocked on the staff room door and just went, "Dentist Tuesday." It made it absolutely not clear whether it was last Tuesday they'd been to the dentist, next Tuesday. Was it permission? Was this, it was to a member of staff who didn't work directly with this student? Was it to say somebody else was going to the dentist on Tuesday? Was there an expectation that this was a convenient time to talk about dentists? Was there an expectation that actually they wanted this message to be passed on to somebody else? And that was just one small example of sort of an expectation that people understood your perspective all the time. We also had, was there an example of, what was it with the hearing student and their piece of work?
Homework.
Yeah, do you want to let
Yeah.
us say that one? I think you were involved with that directly, weren't you?
We had a learner, a teenager, who was having consistent problems wherever she went, and whether this was with deaf learners or with hearing peers, it made no difference. She was a very capable language user, she was a BSL user, she had full access to language, but the things she kept encountering were situations where maybe she'd done the homework, other people hadn't done the homework, had found it very, very difficult, and she would say, well, you need to work harder, and you need to just do a bit more, like I do. And there was just this lack of understanding of how she would be perceived then, and the friendships that would not emerge for her because of this. And when I spoke with her at length, I had many, many teaching opportunities with her where I would say, think about their perspective, think about how they feel. When you say, you need to work harder, I've done it, it's here. Would it be better to just say nothing? And she said, well, do you want me to lie? It's the truth, I have done it. What's the problem? But for her, she had these intense social problems, which actually for her, we're trying to get her ready to get skilled up to go into the workplace. You know, it had become so entrenched for her that we had this big difficulty.
And left her very vulnerable too, and people around her irritated, which is not a good thing, is it? So we started to question. Now, I was raising with Helen, you were doing your MA at this time, and I was saying, I think we should look into theory of mind. People have looked at it with younger children, and in particular those who are on the autistic spectrum, but let's have a look. Can we apply this here? Can we do anything about running a theory of mind group? This was our idea, was to try and see if we could help address a number of these issues with a group. We wanted to work in a group because we felt social interaction and explanation and seeing how other people felt was quite important in running it this way. So we think the difficulties were arising when the deaf learner hadn't expected or predicted the feelings or behaviours of another. And then there were common misunderstandings, not because they'd misread or misunderstood the sound of speech. This now isn't to do with communication per se, but it was to do with not understanding, as Helen's illustrated very well there, the reasons why someone might say something or why they may behave in a certain way. They're not thinking through those issues. So they're unaware of the social strategies of others. So we were then faced with having to see how we could get a baseline. We knew, I think the students we were working with were probably from 16 to 60. So we were trying to find some materials that may be appropriate for us to help see just how, the extent of the issues for individual students and how we might run a group together because of that. So we came across some, Francesca wrote some short stories which are really more developed for just the boundary between primary and secondary school, for looking at a whole range of different aspects that touched on theory of mind. So there were simple accounts of events which concern different motivations can lie behind everyday utterances that are not literally true. So there were, I'll give you a list of those there, but we thought this might be a possibility to use those. So I think you contacted the author, didn't you, from this paper, and she was extremely helpful because she hadn't published these. They were just not all of the stories. She had one or two examples in a paper. She sent us all of them and was happy for us to adapt them, which we needed to do, as I'll explain. So they included short story themes like lie, white lie, joke, pretend, misunderstanding, persuade, figure of speech, so on and so forth, double bluff. And we modified these into accessible English, use BSL, SSE, or whatever was appropriate for the individual. So we, as I say, we talked to Francesca Happy about changing those. And we had a control story to make sure they had the ability to participate. By the by, they're not standardised on any particular age group, but I tried them all on my daughter who was 8 at that time. She understood and got them all right and could explain them all. So it's quite interesting for us to know that actually by 8 you've acquired quite a lot of skill in understanding how we do and don't interact with each other according to keeping our own face and dealing with all these sorts of issues. So here's an example of one. I'll just let you read that. It needs a bit of thinking about. These are everyday events where there is a response that's not true, and you have to think why it might not be true. So these were the sorts of responses we got from the group of deaf people we identified as needing this support. So some of them said yes, it's true because all the class were in school, so they'd obviously not read the detail there. One of them, this sort of thing was often typical of the responses because they had quite elaborate descriptions of why the child might be lying. Whereas obviously the simple thing is forgotten, like we all do in everyday life. It's just a straightforward thing, or it doesn't matter to him. Whereas we've got quite complex descriptions here of how that might work. So that's the sort of thing that's happening. So overall, let's watch the time a bit here. The participants with lower scores showed problems widely across all of those topic areas. The exception was the topic areas of pretend and lie, which showed good understanding from all participants. Maybe those are things that you discuss with children more. And the lie was quite an interesting one, wasn't it, when we tried to work in the group on when it was okay to lie about somebody's haircuts and who you would tell the truth to. We had to talk about circles of friends. If someone close to you, you could say something about their hair, but the further away you are, the less likely you are to be honest. And yes, it threw all manner of debates and discussions. But there was particular difficulty with sarcasm. So 8 out of the 10 participants were unable to recognise sarcasm. Some understood it as being truthful. So we've used that example of, you know, if you appear late at work and someone says, "Oh, nice to see you early again." You know, actually you need to know that bit of banter that can happen. And someone might take that truthfully and then it gets to be difficult. But this crazy talk. I think as we raised some of these issues, it was clear many of the deaf young people we were working with were just not sure why people would do this. It just hadn't sort of entered into their comprehension about why this was happening between them. So the questions involving figures of speech were particularly difficult. Double bluffs too were hard. And some, as you see, all of the stories had two questions: was it true, and then to answer why. So often they knew about whether it's true or not, but the reasoning behind it was beyond many of them to comprehend. So what factors could have affected theory mind? We've only got correlations here, so we don't know for sure. So those with the highest theory of mind scores were older. They had worked and they had perhaps language levels. So we don't know how all this goes, and obviously there will be a lot more research to do on this. Some participants with the lower theory of mind scores had also got the lowest language level. And apart from learners at the top and the bottom of the range, it seems to be difficult to show particular connections. But it was a very small sample, and it was just getting us started. Hopefully, yeah, I've just talked a little bit about some of the intervention strategies we used, which did create some challenges for us, didn't it? To start discussing them, actually you have to dig quite deep yourself about where's the margin between the white lie and the non-white lie, and how do you explain those things? How do you explain sarcasm, why people say or do certain things? So we did get some interesting debates. We did some role play. We talked about social situations and how we build up, and what small talk is about, and why that happens in order to engage with people. And lots of discussion. So there was we were learning as much as they were, I think, as we continued through it. So our final outcomes were some of the students continued to interact in the same way as before. They did. We only had a limited period of time. They've probably been functioning this way for many years, so it was hard to get change. But one or two really seemed to be very aware of some of the strategies. I remember one young man was just fascinated about why hearing people talk about the weather in the corridor and so on, and actually starting to understand that this is a social British context. Yes, there's cultural stuff, of course there's cultural stuff. And so he found that a real help for him, because he thought he didn't understand why people think they're direct to the point. So even just discussing that, he started to use that, and you could see him go, oh, it's like someone had explained something that had been a mystery for a long time. And some demonstrated understanding the classroom but had difficulty linking it to everyday life. And some, we had one or two who had perhaps, there was one student in his 40s, I think, or 50s, who knew he struggled with this, but he did not know how to handle it. He needed a script. We worked through some very definite role-playing scripts for when he was going out places so he could handle things. He simply hadn't got the experience or the confidence to try different approaches. Moving on.
Okay.
Seconds.
So this led us on to the second study, which is strategies used by professionals to enhance the use of mental state language in deaf children. So where this came from was the first study that we did together. We started to realise that there was a need to shape our understanding really to inform wider practice. We did two battled workshops, a national one and a regional one, and we had Teach the Deaf come, qualified Teach the Deaf, who said, this resonates with me, I have children who find this difficult, I don't know what to do with this, I don't know what to use to support them. So we started to realise there was something here for us. The undergraduate and postgraduate learning teaching here at the university, I think, has supported us, because we've had opportunity to see students out on placement working with young deaf people and see the difficulties that they're relating to. So we put this successful bid in. Okay, so these were the A's that we had. Wanted to look at how professionals use opportunities in shared reading. I'll come on to talk about why shared reading, to enhance these skills. And we wanted to get the views from professionals about their understanding of skills and the role they've got as educators. I don't think there's been any study at all which has talked to professionals and practitioners about their views on theory of mind, or the difficulties or the things that they actually see. So that's really what we wanted to do. So we came across this thinking about fiction and the use of fiction. So obviously we were looking for a measure or something we could analyse. So we wanted to be able to look at maybe a speech and language therapist or a teacher of the deaf working with a deaf child and think, okay, how are you using your work to ensure that young people are not getting into the difficulties that we've seen in Project One? So we had this idea about fiction and about the idea and the opportunities it gives us to talk about empathy and social influence. So we started to think about things like the Gruffalo. Who knows the Gruffalo?
Inside out.
There's no such thing as a Gruffalo.
Well, this is exactly it. Okay. So this okay. For anybody who doesn't know this story, we might think it's on the front here. It looks like a very, very simple children's book. In reality, this is a book aimed at children with very, very complex cognitive load that we're actually placing on children in reality. It's a tale of complete trickery. There's a fine line between appearance and reality. The mouse, this poor little mouse, he's frightened to death of getting eaten. He's got these three characters, the fox, the owl and the snake, who are all looking for their next dinner. Poor mouse doesn't want to get eaten. He conjures up this little story about, well, I'm going to have my tea with this Gruffalo. He's huge, he's got these terrible tusks, he's very, very scary. Of course, they all think, I don't really want to mess with this Gruffalo. I'll just get on my way and let you get on with that. So he manages to save his skin. Of course, at first, he doesn't believe that there's any such thing as a Gruffalo. When he later encounters a real Gruffalo, he has to think of another little lie to get him out of this situation. And he works it all such a way that in the end, everybody's scared to death of him. And he's left eating his nut in complete bliss and happiness. So it's a very, very interesting story. It gives lots of opportunity for surface level discussions, so vocabulary, describing emotions, happy, sad, sequencing of events, and that's all okay. But actually, we're not particularly interested in that. What we're interested in is this, these difficult questions. So if an owl's a real animal, a mouse is a real animal, a snake's a real animal, why isn't there a Gruffalo? Why does the mouse really think the Gruffalo exists? If he doesn't think that Gruffalo exists, why does he say it? Do the other animals believe that Gruffalo exists? Does the Gruffalo believe the animals are scared of the mouse? Why do the animals run away from the mouse in the end? Are they really scared of him? Or are they scared of something else? If we read the Gruffalo with a deaf child, we've got the huge potential that a child will be able to understand every single word in that book, perhaps read every word in that book, and understand all the vocabulary. When you come onto these questions, we might actually realise they haven't got a clue of the concepts of the book. So all these theory of mind issues, and then we can see why we get to the position that we've seen with deaf teenagers, where actually those social situations haven't really got much of. So we started to think about this idea about books. So we thought, well, we're going to film these pairs reading in a shared reading task. So that looks like something we could analyse and think about and see what they're up to. We wanted something about a reflective interviewing there because we feel that's really important. We had this huge debate about choice of books. Are we going to give one set book and say, everyone read that and let's see what we come up with? Or are we going to give choice of book? And we actually decided to guide towards thoughts and feelings. So we said to Teacher of the Deaf, this is a study about thoughts and feelings. You choose your book according to what you feel the child will engage with, needs, so on. And we decided to do that because we realised that actually some deaf children might not engage with any book that was set. They might have read it before, they might have just done it in the mainstream class, language levels, age levels, variety of things. We decided not to include any bilingual or multilingual speakers, including VSL, because for analysis purposes, that throws another language in entirely. We were following this principle of grounded theory. So what we were really trying to do was avoid preconceptions. So what we wanted to do was leave things quite loose in some ways. It's really to allow the data to guide us and guide our theory and direction. So we didn't want to come with a view of these are the things that we're looking for. We wanted to collect the data and then see what emerged. So So we have this idea of videos and reflective experience. So starting to think about some of the strategies that we've seen Teach the Deaf using, I think I need to say that we're still kind of processing with this data and wrestling with this data really, but these are the things that are emerging so far. We've seen practitioners using conversational tangents, so they might start with a book, but then actually realise that something relates to something else that we might be able to go off in a tangent with, and then they come back to the book. Relating to other experiences was something that I think pretty much everybody in the study did. So that might be, we start with looking at one of the books, start with a concept that's coming up in the book, and say, do you remember last week in the playground when this happened? And that seemed to put things in context for the children. We had an idea about thought bubbles and speech bubbles, and I'll come on to show you some more of this. Overt discussion and questioning, which is very similar to the questions that I showed you with the grid flow. We were really disappointed to see that this idea about overt discussion and questioning, we felt could have been done so much more, and in many ways was very limited. And when we came on to reflect these things with practitioners, they said it's really difficult. And our view on that would be the things that deaf children are finding difficult are the things you need to do. So there's a big debate on that, I think. Physical props and role play, and this idea about talking about the background and the foreground of the story. So I'll try and illustrate this for you. So one of the practitioners used this and uses this regularly. So this idea of what I'm thinking is not always what I say, and what I say is not always what I think. And she had a child using these speech bubbles and thought bubbles and writing on their own things and the characters on the story, and really kind of jostling with all these different ideas. And this child got this. This is the idea about overt discussion and questioning, which practitioners found quite difficult. One practitioner used said, what I wanted to do was talk about things that are happening at the same time that we might not realise. So the idea that books have got foregrounds and backgrounds. So a character can be doing something or going down a pathway, not realising at the same time somebody else has got a different agenda, or someone's doing something else meanwhile. And this was really useful. Okay, so I mentioned that we looked at practitioners' reflections. What we've done so far really with this is to try to group things in different ways and see what's coming out. So there's an idea about things being difficult and things can get lost if Teach the Deaf aren't aware of this. So even with very, very bright children, actually if we don't come in and teach this and be mindful of it, they might have huge difficulties. There was a feeling that the area is difficult for deaf children and it affects everyday life. So this person has said struggles with friendships, can't understand somebody else's point of view, and that all needs to understand what they're feeling like. There was a feeling that the costs of ignoring this kind of thing are too great. Well, of course they are, because actually this is about being able to maintain friendships, relationships, work. An overriding thing from all the practitioners was that research needs to meet practice, and at the moment practitioners in deaf education don't actually have access to a lot of research papers, don't have that much access to research at all, and the research that they do have, they don't find that useful really. So these are some of the reflections. I want something like a stick on the wall or a checklist or some training. I'm much better at going to training than reading something. I read the articles and I think, well, how can I use that? What is this? So technical. What am I supposed to do with that? It might be brilliant, but I need someone to say. So it's about the ability of practitioners to really unpick research and use that in a hands-on way. So again, very similar thing. In terms of our outcomes, we've been asked to do a national conference workshop in 2015, and we think from that we're going to be used as a satellite base for the conference as well. We've been developing our e-learning and teaching materials based around some of these things, and we're working on these 3 papers, of which one of them is pretty much very nearly ready to go. So we're looking at using fiction to promote the theory of mind skills in primary age children, and that's the case study of the strategies that people might use. Looking at fictional book sharing and the voice of the practitioner, and this idea about the use of conversational tangents in how they can be used to promote life experience for deaf children. And that's it really. That's where we're up to.
Well, that was very, very interesting. And actually made me feel like a deaf child, because coming from a different country, a very different culture, and I have lived here for 15 years, I still don't get the British sort of this nicety or whatever the word is thing. So I think that you do have to sort of be very aware that this is in a very much in a sort of British social etiquette context. And I wasn't completely convinced that some of it actually, what you are looking at, really describes theory of mind, and what describes just learning. So, because it's really all about being exposed to this social etiquette that is appropriate in this particular culture. And, you know, like a deaf child isn't automatically exposed to it. That I think applies for many people coming from different cultures. I felt that the second study actually sort of addressed real theory of mind much more.
I think that's exactly where we started from. We started as practitioners as a big notion, and yes, we've been able to hone it down.
And it would be really interesting to sort of unpick where what is the line between sort of social etiquette that is very culturally sort of varied or different.
And for many of the young people we're working with who are in the deaf community, I mean, there's a different culture there. So when we join in that, knowing how humour works and the different aspects of that, clearly there has to be some cultural aspect to it.
There were just two things. One, it's interesting. I think the second is particularly good. It's interesting because we know increasingly that newborn hearing screening gives children language, but the area it hasn't improved and is clearly at risk is pragmatics, and that goes directly to this. So that's really interesting. And the other thing is that it would be interesting to look at kids in Northumberland specifically, because all the deaf kids do philosophy for children as part of a programme in all mainstream schools, where they are set all sorts of ethical challenges and what ifs, and it'd be really interesting to look at those children as a specific group and say, well, does that input affect this? And there's a very specific, nice little cohort there.
I think it would also be interesting to see how it affects the people around those deaf children, because a lot of this constraint is nervousness by people around communication and fear, like we were talking with the example of the parents who've got a deaf and a hearing child, which is very child-driven, and I think that's how also some of the language and some of these issues develop. You move with the child, and if the child isn't moving, then it can be
very good. Yeah, I also thought that
I think we're going to have to finish up there.
just
Sorry.
one sentence.
Okay.
I think that very often, as we know, deafness and autism are comorbidities, and I'm just wondering how much of that is overdiagnosis based on these kind of
definitely.
Like I said, thanks again for our speakers.